This is an e-learning course brought to you by Contemplative Light. We are a community of spiritual teachers and writers, graciously offering our insight, experience, and most importantly, our love. We hope you enjoy your course.
So now we come to the 12th century mystic, Hildegard of Bingen. And whereas Dionysius was much more of a unitive mystic in his writing, Hildegard, the first major German mystic, it was far more of a visionary. Hildegard was an artist, very much a Renaissance woman, even before the Renaissance. In a sense, her writing was like a precursor to the morality play. And the medieval morality play would have figures like virtue and vice, or personified on the stage by these different characters. She had a kind of early version of that, but it was often set to music. So there was this sort of dramatized fight between good and evil, and she was also a visual artist. She wrote Theology, and we'll get into that in some depth in a bit. But first, something about her life. She was signed over by her parents as tithe to a monastery at the age of 7. So from the age of 7 on, she's completely immersed in this monastic life, and is the process of the offices and prayer and the iconography and the theology of the monastery is all around her from such an early age. She's just sort of saturated with it. And given her natural gifts, she processes that in a unique artistic way, and then concentrates and reproduces some of the sort of high 12th century art that we have. She was highly energetic, and compared with visionaries like Dante, or she in fact can be seen as a kind of early influence on Dante. But she was also a theologian. She was a preacher. She was a historian, very much a visionary, in the literal sense that we use that term today to kind of mean forward thinking and galvanizing a group and kind of leading them in a certain direction and having a vision for an organization. But the visionaries we talk about in this context as mystics, like Blake, like a Dante, like a Hildegard of Bingen, it literally means you have some sort of transcendent vision that the mystic themselves feels is this divine revelation that they are to record and then pass on to others as a means of ministry, of encouragement, of revealing something of the divine reality through this vision that they've been granted. She was also kind of an early scientist in the sense that she wrote about medicine, pharmacology, and she was an artist, a writer, a painter, a musician. So very unique in the sense that here is a woman. And in this day and age, there was a clearly dominant male hierarchy, a patriarchy that she is existing under, but she is extremely learned, highly intelligent, and prolific in her output in so many of these different fields, very much a polymath. Now, she at some point became a Benedictine abbess at this monastery and became very much an outspoken critic. That's another unique quality that she had, was she's not just kind of regurgitating the Benedictine theology and towing the line of and kind of getting heard by being a conformist. And I think part of why Hildegard resonates so much with kind of contemporary artistic is she does have something of that iconoclast in her, but she is still very much in and of the Benedictine movement of the time. She's by no means sort of excluded, but instead achieves a kind of institutional authority And yet there is this desire for a kind of moral purity, and she becomes this outspoken critic of some of the violations, some of the corruption, some of the laxity she sees going on in the church and monasteries of her era, and very much interfered with some of the corruption in the church in her day. So the mystical visions that she had mystical visions from a young age, which she described as the shade of the living light. The first of which came at age 3. She recounts a vision that she had as early as age 3. And these visions, including the one from age 3, she kept to herself for a great many years. There was an anxiety that if she shared that, she would be excluded or shunned or thought to be maybe crazy or hallucinating. So this was very much something she kept to herself, but she has this description that is part of a pattern of mystics down through today, and really the mystic from today I hear echoing her words is actually the Sufi mystic Llewellyn Vaughan Lee. And she describes, and you could put this in the sort of Neoplatonic category too, but the vividness of her description is that all things perceivable by the senses somehow exist in the light of God. And this is a thread that runs through mystical awakening experiences, that somehow there is this quality, this substance inherent at the beginning, from the very beginning of creation, that is somehow more foundational than even, say, an atomic level, that somehow all perceivable things, all forms arise out of this light, this love that is somehow the very foundational building block of the existence of form. And she kind of introduces that thrust in her writing as well. Patterns and terms that she uses, some of the images, is that of light, of rapture. She kind of has this prophetic gift, speaks in prophecies, and very much a kind of desire for God. There's a certain sort of a brilliant kind of color to her work, whether written or visual, but there's also, echoing Dionysius again, this kind of apophatic negation in her language. That is another of these connecting threads that interweave the different mystics. There is a beauty on the one hand that she portrays in her work, but at the same time a sense that this isn't sufficient to communicate the grandeur, the awesomeness of God, that really there is something that transcends that, and that only apophatic and theology and negation can really sort of get at. Early on, she sought advice from another of the mystics that we'll be talking about, and that is Bernard of Clairvaux. Connected with him for support, because in order to spread her writings, without being sort of condemned or maybe even called out for heresy, was approbation. She needed a stamp of approval from the papacy, and Bernard was someone who stepped in on her behalf and helped sort of legitimize her project, her writings, her artwork, her music, so that could be sort of adopted and disseminated, coming back on her that she is somehow violating official church doctrine. So an early ally of hers was Bernard of Clairvaux, to really get her recognized officially by the Pope as this female prophet that spoke with some degree of divine authority. Again, very much a kind of strong female figure, and very unique in that regard. So Hildegard held that wisdom was part of the ongoing work of creation. This somehow interconnection between the process of creation, creativity, and as closely interwoven with virtue and wisdom, what was kind of central to her understanding. She had this sort of cosmic vision. And when it comes to sort of the visionary mystics that kind of anticipate the divine comedy, because Dante in his work refers back to so many and synthesizes so much of sort of the medieval theological, but also a worldview, but also the work of different medieval mystics. And we can see very much that sort of encyclopedic cosmic scope of Hildegard of Bingen's vision sort of anticipate Dante's encyclopedic vision. So she has this sort of cosmic scope that she's operating on, and we can see that in some of this artwork, that it has a kind of mandala-like quality. The mandala artwork, of course, from Eastern traditions, is intended somehow to be a symbol of, a map of, an emblem of the cosmos as a whole, and to reflect something of the order and beauty within it. In the East, of course, the Buddhist practice of creating the mandala, and then after it's meticulously made over the course of a couple days, this beautiful piece of art is then sort of wiped away, to then also reinforce this idea of transience of the created order. I think the emphasis with Hildegard is a little more, not so much the transience, but the sublime nature of and the beauty inherent within the order of creation. She was very much sort of interested in the relationship between that macro level cosmos and the micro level psyche, and that interconnection. And because of that, she's interested in justice. She's interested in compassion as a hallmark of wisdom. She connects the idea of wisdom and experience specifically through the sense of taste. In Latin, she kind of has that play on the etymological connection between those two words of sapere and sapientia, that is wisdom and also tasting. So this verse sort of come, taste, and see that the Lord is good, is for her the sort of way of wisdom is that direct experience. Again, direct experience of the divine being such a central component of the mystical theology as a whole. She is very sensual. And that's why we think of her in this visionary vein through her visual art, through the sort of sensual texture of her language and writing. She emphasizes this art of sort of savoring experience, tasting life, the joy of living, a real kind of exuberance about her work. She also has this search to break free of traditional patterns and constraints, finding this kind of universal, inclusive vision for humanity. And I think there she's very much in line with the kind of artistic tradition. If you know anything about the history of different artistic movements and art history over time, there is this rejection of the forms that have gone before and an embrace of something new is sort of the pattern over and over. And Hildegard of Bingen very much falls into that pattern of looking for new forms, looking for new ways of expression, new modes of expression, and one that can communicate precisely that inclusive, compassionate, all-loving nature of the divine. Whereas so much of medieval theology and leading up to medieval theology, certainly in the church, is very much about responding to the threat of heresy and therefore sort of defining, categorizing, differentiating, rejecting, speaking out against certain sort of false teachings. Her project is much grander in scale and reflects a certain universality of the divine love versus that sort of dogmatic project. She's interested in communicating the sort of sacred nature of everyday life, and I think we get a sense of that in her writings. So two streams of light, according to tradition, formed a cross over her room at the time of death in 1179. People that were there sort of subsequently wrote about that there was sort of two streams of light on the horizon forming a cross over the room that she was in, and that she entered that eternal light. X marks the spot in death, and in so doing had this vision of sort of openness to all. Hildegard's major work, Scivias, or Know the Ways. In Latin, Scivias, the title of her work was To Know the Ways. She had vision from God, or an experience, or some divine revelation that she heard the voice of God telling her to write what you see and hear. And this kind of magnum opus of hers consisted of sort of three distinct parts. Again, this sort of triads that we find so much of in the writings of the mystics, especially in the medieval period. It consisted of 26 visions, and for her, visions come in the form of, yes, the visual, but the auditory and some sort of sense impression of the divine is sort of self-revelation. The next section consists of 36 miniatures, these kind of vignettes that she writes, and then the third section is theological interpretations of her visions. She not only kind of gives the high level or visual of what she experienced in a descriptive fashion, but then goes into a kind of her own theological interpretation of each. In the first vision that she unpacks in her writing is the order of God's creation, beginning with the creation of Adam and Eve, and then moving to the structure of the universe as a whole, the relationship of body and soul, the relationship of God to his people in the synagogue, the choirs of angels in kind of panoramic description of the order of creation. And then part two of this work, Scivias, by Hildegard, is the order of redemption, of Christ as Redeemer, of the Trinity, of the Church as the bride of Christ, of the mother of the faithful. So we're very much getting this kind of Catholic flavor of it. She touches on baptism, on confirmation, orders of the church, Christ sacrificed on the cross, giving very kind of vivid, sensual description of that, the Eucharist, and the fight against the devil. That next section, she's concerned with the history of salvation, which she has this allegory of a building adorned with these allegorical figures and virtues that are meant to sort of guide and facilitate the soul on its journey to God. And then she describes the sort of sacred symphony of heaven she uses to sort of precede her musical composition. It ends, in a sense, in direct experience even for us, as people still experience her music today, and we'll include some links here to some of her compositions to get kind of another flavor as well, along with some of the visual art you're seeing in this lecture. Another of her writings was Liber Vitae Meritorium, about freedom that comes through the practice and life through merit and virtue, and which she kind of describes the virtue and vice, present those kind of two poles that we oscillate between. She has descriptions of punishment and purgatory that have some vivid, physical, grotesque quality to them, sort of anticipate Dante's descriptions in the Inferno and Purgatorio. So there very much throughout the writing of Hildegard of Bingen, or in her work, is certainly a tributary that then flows into Dante's Divine Comedy and lays some groundwork for some of the work that he's up to in his, not just the grandiosity of his cosmic scope, but in the vividness of his descriptions of sort of the souls in torment. So again, that kind of medieval imagination at work, and here's a germ of that later flowering. And her next work, the Liber Divinorum Operum, is about the work of the divine. And this is a little more in line specifically with the mystical aspect of her writing, about the ecstatic loss of consciousness and ecstasis, or the word ecstasy from the Greek ekstasis, meaning out of the body. And that she has this mystical vision she describes in this work. In it, she sort of focuses on the Word as the key to the work of God, as this pinnacle of which, the pinnacle of which is humanity itself. She expounds on John's gospel at length in this work. And this calls to mind this thread that weaves through the mystics of the Logos, or divine pattern, divine, maybe even unmanifest energy, the divine word that is embedded within creation that gives rise to the human. And that is somehow a link between us and God. It imbues us with divine capacities. In this work too, there's this cosmic allegory of divine love personified as caritas, and wisdom, or sapientia, are these two figures that are treated in this work. And a characteristic of the work itself is this sort of swirling poetry that demonstrates a dynamic activity of God in this historical salvational work, so that somehow wisdom and divine love are kind of handmaidens of God in going about his work of transformation and salvation in the world. And then another aspect of it is this image of universal man, a depiction of the human body itself as a microcosm of the macrocosm of the universe itself. In Hildegard of Bingen's work, she sort of situates the body within a theological context, stretches all the way back from this cosmic vision of New Testament salvation back to Genesis and the 6 days of creation, and kind of how that was imbued and formed from the beginning. That capacity or connection rather between the body on the microcosm and creation, the cosmos on the macrocosm. And so a quote from Hildegard of Bingen in which we really get a sense of her tone, her voice, is from Scivias. I, the fiery life of divine essence, am a flame beyond the beauty of the meadows. I gleam in the waters. I burn in the sun, moon, and stars. With every breeze, as with invisible life that contains everything, I awaken everything to life. I am the breeze that nurtures all things green. I encourage blossoms to flourish with ripening fruits. I am the rain coming from the dew that causes the grasses to laugh with the joy of life. And here another quote by Hildegard of Bingen. We cannot live in a world that is interpreted for us by others. An interpreted world is not a hope. Part of the terror is to take back our own listening, to use our own voice, to see our own light. And then also in her writing on the centrality of the Word. The Word is living, being, spirit, all verdant greening, all creativity. This Word manifests itself in every creature. And then, like billowing clouds, like the incessant gurgle of the brook, the longing of the Spirit can never be stilled. And there you really get that poetic quality of this remarkable mystic, woman, artist, visionary, Hildegard of Bingen. And some key takeaways from Hildegard and her life. One was this universal, inclusive message of love for all creation and all humanity. Another is her contention that music is the voice of God, and there's something of the divine communicated uniquely through music. And that what we perceive all of it exists within the light of God, and that life itself is fundamentally sacred. She taught that God is radically inclusive, and that encompasses the virtue, the wisdom, and the beauty reflected in creation. That we see something of those qualities in creation are like reflections of God back to us, that we can perceive something of Him like a mirror of God.
This concludes our course. To learn more, please visit our website at www.contemplativelight.com. We look forward to seeing you again soon.